first century Israel was a spiritual pressure cooker of expectations. Kia ora family, my name is AJ, and today we're going to go through the 3 Messianic miracles. The Jews there were expecting the Messiah. The timing we get from Daniel chapter 9 in the 77s, but the religious leaders also needed to know who the Messiah was. And yes, the Messiah came and he fulfilled a lot of prophecy, but there are also 3 specific miracles that the religious leaders taught that only the Messiah would do. And so they were looking for those miracles, and so were the multitudes. So the first Messianic miracle is the healing of the Jewish leper. Now, why was this such a significant miracle? Well, in the Mosaic law, specifically Leviticus chapter 13 and 14, it tells us about the process that someone had to go through if they were identified as having leprosy. And so they would need to go to the priest would examine them, and if they were declared to have leprosy, they would need to tear their clothes. They would have to wear sort of like a mask from the nose down to cover their face. They were classed as unclean, and so they weren't allowed to go to the temple or the tabernacle to worship or to participate in the feasts. And if someone was walking towards them, they would have to say unclean, unclean, to let the other people know that they have leprosy and that they would unclean. And so if those people were to touch them, they would also become unclean. And if they didn't pick up leprosy from that interaction, then they would have to go through a process of cleansing. Now, when someone was healed of leprosy, again, they would have to go to the priests at the temple or the tabernacle, and there was a whole process. So they would be under observation for 7 days, and there's a whole bunch of different sacrifices that they would need to go through. They would need to answer the questions: did this person originally have leprosy? Were they healed of their leprosy? And who healed them? Or what were the circumstances behind their healing? Since the completion of the Mosaic law, up until Jesus' time, first century Israel, no one had gone through that process. So people that you might know in the Bible, Miriam, she was healed of leprosy, and she was Jewish, but she was healed of her leprosy before the completion of the Mosaic law. So she didn't have to undergo those processes. Another one you might know is Naaman. Naaman was healed of his leprosy, but he was Syrian. He wasn't Jewish, so he didn't have to go through that process either. And so by the time we get to first century Israel, the teaching of the religious leaders was that only the Messiah would be able to heal someone who was Jewish of leprosy, and therefore undergo that procedure. So then we get to Jesus, and we see the story in Luke chapter 5, verses 12 to 16. And we see there that Luke, being detailed, being the doctor, he says that this man was full of leprosy. So it had basically taken over his whole body, and it probably wouldn't have been long until he would pass away because of the leprosy. And he has an interaction with Jesus, and he asked Jesus to be made clean. So again, remember, he's lived however long it was with leprosy, and he's been unclean, unable to participate in the feast and go to the temple to worship and that kind of stuff. And so he's asking Jesus to be made clean. And so Jesus obliges. He touches the man and heals him of his leprosy. And again, Jesus touching the man was significant. He didn't have to do that, but again, this guy, he hadn't felt human touch for a long time since he had leprosy. And then Jesus tells him to go to show himself to the priests. as a testimony to them, to the priests. And so again, that's because no one has gotten through that process and been declared healed of their leprosy before. And so Jesus, he's not only doing these miracles because he's kind, but he's doing this specific miracle. One of the reasons is he's doing it to authenticate that he is the Messiah. Now, we don't get to see the details of what happens when the leper goes back to the priests and they go through the process and he's declared healed from his leprosy. But we do see a response from the people of first century Israel. And to see that, we look at Mark chapter 1. The story is in verses 40 to 45. But we see in verse 45, the response of the people is that basically it says Jesus couldn't publicly enter a city after that. So he had created such a stir amongst the people that he couldn't publicly enter another city. So then the second Messianic miracle is when the man is healed who is mute or dumb. So basically he couldn't speak. That's found in Matthew chapter 12, verses 22 to 37. This is a lot happens after this, but we'll really just zero in on the Messianic miracle. Now, why was this miracle significant? Well, basically, for the Pharisees, they would teach, that to cast out a demon from someone who's been possessed by a demon, they would communicate or establish communication with the demon, find out the demon's name, and then use the name of the demon to cast it out of the person. And so that was their practice, and that's how they traditionally would do it. Now, if the demon possessed someone and they were mute, they wouldn't be able to say the name, and therefore they wouldn't have been able to cast out that type of demon. So again, they taught that when the Messiah comes, he would be able to do this miracle. So Matthew 12, Jesus comes along, and that's exactly what he does. Again, he's authenticating that he is the Messiah. And so he does it publicly. And we see the response of the crowd in verses 22 and 23. And notice the question they ask. They say, could this be the son of David? And the son of David, that is a specific messianic title. And so again, the crowd, based on the teachings from the likes of the Pharisees, they recognize, if this guy has just cast out a demon that made this guy mute, is he the Messiah? And then we see in verse 24, the Pharisees, so they were threatened by Jesus's power and authority, and we'll look at it in a separate video. We'll look at why they've rejected him. But basically, in verse 24, they reject Jesus as the Messiah. And they say, no, the only reason you can do these miracles is because you're possessed by Beelzebub, another demon. And so they're basically saying, the reason that you can do this work is because you yourself are demon possessed. Then we have the last of the three Messianic miracles, the healing of the man born blind. And so the teaching, again, from the Pharisees was that if someone was born blind, they were under divine judgment, and it's either their parents sinned or they must have sinned in the womb, but for whatever reason, they were under divine judgment, and then they were born blind. And again, they came up with this teaching that only the Messiah would be able to heal someone that was born blind, and that's based off Isaiah chapter 35, verse 5. And so in John chapter 9, Jesus comes face to face with someone who is born blind. Jesus proceeds to heal him, and this causes like a big kerfuffle with the Pharisees. And so they go and interrogate the man. They interrogate the man's parents to make sure, was he actually born blind? And then they come back to the man and interrogate him again. And they've already rejected Jesus as Messiah. And based on their own teaching, he's doing all these miracles. And so the people are really starting to be like, well, yeah, if he's like not from God, how can he do all these things? He must be the Messiah, is basically what they're saying. And so they excommunicate the guy that was born blind and that was now healed, because they didn't want it to get out any further. Those are the 3 Messianic miracles, and you can see the reaction of the people. They're not just the everyday miracle. I think the real tragedy of the story was that the people were ready, the timing was perfect, the signs were undeniable, but because the religious leaders were so stuck in their tradition, they missed the Messiah. And it's a powerful reminder to us that, yeah, sometimes the truth challenges what we've been brought up with, but that we do need to go back to the Word, study it. It's not an overnight thing. It's definitely a marathon, but go back to the Word, study it, and make sure that what we're doing and thinking and believing and practicing are all aligned back to His Word. If you have any questions, comments, encouragements, whatever it is, let us know.